Welcome into college football overtime. We have a lot to discuss because I say it every single time that we've been on one of these shows during the offseason. The offseason doesn't exist because college football never sleeps, because we have the potential end of the NCAA Super Leagues, all this craziness that is happening across the sport as the Big Ten and the SEC are meeting up to away from the rest of college football to maybe determine the future of the sport. We also have NFL coaches, teams swooping in to the NCAA and potentially stealing away some head coaches and other things. And I think that that's going to be a very interesting topic that we got to get into. Plus, the Senior Bowl just happened, and we got to talk about some of the players and things that stood out. So we have a very jam-packed show right here tonight on College Football Overtime. Before we jump into all of this stuff, make sure you make sure you subscribe so you get all of the college football news that you need right here from myself and Abe Gordon. How you doing, buddy?
We are doing well, man. It's like you said, man, it just keeps unraveling somehow. But I'm glad to be here with you to break it all down and discuss it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to get any more simple, but let's just break it all down. Let's start here. So last week, you see Tennessee, the state of Tennessee, filing a lawsuit against the NCAA for its NIL rules, of course, because they are being punished for the lack of clarity that exists right now with name, image, and likeness. And now we have a joint committee between the two biggest players in the sport. Greg Sankey of the SEC and Tony Petitti of the Big Ten are setting up an advisory board to basically determine where the sport is going and what things are going to happen. And this is where the money is. This is where the best programs reside in the Big Ten and in the SEC, especially after the way that we saw the Pac-12 dissolve most recently. A lot of those big players like USC, Washington, Oregon, UCLA, they're moving up into the Big Ten. And then in the SEC, of course, you have Texas and Oklahoma moving into the SEC, which has all but eliminated the Big 12 from major consideration as far as brands are concerned. The Pac-12 obviously doesn't exist anymore, and then the ACC is left scrambling on the outside looking in. But at the end of the day, the Big Ten and the SEC are jumping together, the rivals, putting aside their differences for what they believe could be the best interest of the sport, because the NCAA has shown that they are utterly incapable of managing this mess that we are in right now. They have been begging Congress to do something instead of actually just doing something themselves. And now the Big Ten and now the SEC, they're going to try to do it themselves. Abe, what are your thoughts on this whole thing? Am I being dramatic when I think that the NCAA could be, maybe not the end of the NCAA, but the end of the NCAA's involvement in college football at the level that we see it now? Could we see it potentially an end to that?
Yeah, I do think you're being a little bit dramatic, and there might be an end result where that is the eventual answer. But I don't think that's why this joint advisory group, as they're calling it, is coming together. They want to enact change, and there's a couple of areas that I think are going to be obvious where they want to change. And then there might be a couple less obvious things. And I think ultimately, if the other schools, the non-SEC and the non-Big Ten schools, agree to the change suggested by this group, then no, you won't see the end of the NCAA, because it's just up to the other schools to go along. Now, if they don't go along, now you start to have a discussion about what this is all about. But I think that there are going to be much smaller issues that get tackled immediately, not immediately, but initially by this group. Look, they're going to, the first thing, in my opinion, their first order of business is going to be to adjust the college football schedule. They need to take a look at the transfer portal, and they need to take a look at signing day. I think we saw the ugly downside of how the schedule works out this season because of some of the weird coaching carousels, and Alabama still being in the playoffs, and Washington as well, stuff like that. So I do think you'll look at the college football schedule as being changed. The other thing, which we really don't know what the issues are yet, is we're in an interesting time, Garrett. You're sliding into the first year of a 12-team playoff. And I think as we see how that plays out, this joint advisory group will also be making suggestions to better the world of college football, the landscape of college football, as we determine how this 12-team thing looks and different areas of that. And then the obvious, the NIL, the long-term sustainability of that model will be addressed as well. But look, I don't think they want to get rid of the NCAA. I don't think the SEC and the Big Ten are trying to kill it off. I actually think they want it so they can place blame throughout the plot or the process. I'm just being honest, so they can place the blame. I mean, always have a fall guy, right? That's the whole plan. And look, if the other member institutions of the NCAA go along with the actions that come out of this group, then no, I don't think the NCAA is going to be killed off. I think it's in a situation where they don't go along, right? When you've got the 38 or however many, 32, whatever the number is,
34
member institutions,
yeah,
between these two conferences against the rest of these schools. I think if they start butting heads, I think that's where you might see, a pull away from the NCAA. But as long as the other institutions who are not part of this joint advisory group go along with the suggestions of the joint advisory group, I don't think the NCAA is going anywhere. I also, like I said, I just don't think the first issue they're going to tackle is NIL and collectives and like this big grandiose change. I think there are things that are going to be easier to enact that they will look at immediately. And the first one, like I said, being the college football schedule.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more pressing issues. But I know you talk about the 34 member institutions and how like they're relying on potentially on these other institutions that aren't within that the group of 34, right, if you will. I don't know how or why those teams would not follow along with whatever those schools decide. I mean,
yeah,
Greg
I agree.
Sankey and Tony Petitti are the most powerful people in college football, period. Not Baker, not anybody else, nobody else. Everybody else pales to what those two are able to do. And they make a very interesting pair too. Just you go back to the base of like where those two come from. Sankey, of course, he's spent years in higher education, and then Petitti was he worked in Major League Baseball. He was a television executive. He knows where the money is. They make for a very, very dynamic pairing. And look, they're the most powerful institutions in college football. I mean, you're talking about Michigan and Ohio State and USC and like all of these big programs up north, and then you come down south and you have every single one of the major programs except for Florida State. And Florida State is right now trying their damnedest to get out of the ACC and get into one of those two conferences. They understand what's going on. They know the writing is on the wall right now. And that's the thing. It's like, I don't know if necessarily the NCAA is going to go away completely. Of course, they're going to be there to manage maybe the other sports like swimming and diving and March Madness and everything else that they do. But as far as their involvement in and around college football, they've been relatively obsolete for a little while. And I don't see why the other institutions, why wouldn't the ACC follow suit? Why wouldn't the Big 12 follow suit? I don't know if they would survive at that same level if they have to go head to head, like TV deal wise, with the SEC and the Big 10. I don't know how they survive that. Because if I'm Florida State, I'm gone. And as soon as I'm able to get out, I'm gone. If I'm Clemson, I'm gone. So they're not able to sustain because they would then lose their best programs. Because every one of the big programs would want to get in with this group of 34 teams. It's something that has been a long time coming. And Dennis Dodd actually wrote a very interesting piece. And he let his mind wander a little bit, and he threw up 4 things that they could choose to tackle right now. So 4 things right here. I'll just read them off right here. So he says they could easily combine to carve out a piece of their media rights revenue to share with the athletes, which effectively would make them employees, and they would collectively bargain. I know we've talked about that on this podcast here multiple times. I won't jump too far into that, but that's a big deal, of course, because they're not employees, and in this model they would be. They could decide essentially on their own to offer 100 scholarships instead of 85. I know that's been one of the things that college coaches discuss all the time. And they almost certainly will demand an unequal share of revenue when the new college football playoff media rights contract is signed. And they could sign up a title sponsor for their endeavors to draw in even more revenue. The CFP and the Final Four don't even do that. So there is tons and tons of money that is on the line potentially in this deal. So if I'm those other institutions, and all this goes back to what I was trying to say in the first place, every one of these other schools would be foolish not to try to jump in on this and try to capitalize as best they can.
Yeah, a couple things. I think it's a dangerous precedent for the SEC and the Big Ten to focus on the financial aspect of this, because then you do start to find ways to push out the other schools, and I don't think that's the result that they want, even if it would make more money for them. So I think a couple of things along those lines. This has to be about the betterment of the sport. It cannot be about maximizing profit. And I think that is what the goal is, but ultimately, is that how it ends up? And so that's why I think you'll start to see some football related adjustments before you get into the financials of NILs, collectives, maximizing all that stuff. Because I agree with you. If they're making football related decisions, the other institutions who are not part of this group would likely go along with it, right? Because it makes sense. It's for the betterment of the sport. When they start to make financial decisions to maximize their profit, that might work inversely for the other schools. It might be minimizing their profit. It might be taking away from their pockets. So I do think there is a danger here when you get further down the road and you got the sport itself maybe where you want it to be. And then you start to just try and add money, because that is where I think a further divide starts to happen. So that to me is where it could get dangerous for the sport, because what we don't want to have is the SEC and Big Ten playing each other, and anyone else is playing this separate kind of other season. We got to keep this thing together, and so that's my hope for this, Garrett, this is purely about the betterment of the sport. It does not turn into a situation where it becomes about maximizing profit. But we all know money rules the worlds.
In a perfect world.
Yeah. And look, these are for-profit institutions. Make no bones about that. And so ultimately, is that where it's headed? Probably. But we just hope there's not too much damage done along the way as they try to figure that out. I just think that at the end of the day, all this is the first step of the killing off of the NCAA. I just think it's premature, because I agree with you. I think these schools are going to go along with what the SEC and Big Ten suggest. It seems like it would be in their best interest to try and keep college football, as we talk about it, right? As we're talking about everyone, Power 5 conferences or 4, whatever you want it to be. Because once they go against this joint advisory group, now you're starting to talk about the Power 2 separating, and it becomes a totally different game at that point.
Yeah, I mean, we're long past the identity. So we talk about we had the Power 5, and now some people call it the Power 4. It really is just the Power 2. I mean, we can sit here and pretend that the ACC and the Big 12 bring as much to the table as these other two conferences. And look, they play football, they do a great job, and they have some good teams, and they have programs with lots of history and tradition, and that's great. But the best and biggest are in these two conferences, and it's long been that way. And it's even going to be exaggerated here in 2024 with these new additions. But I mean, at the end of the day, this is about putting an end to this conga line of issues that the NCAA has had. Like, we've got never-ending litigation about name, image, and likeness. We have the antitrust. We have transfer stuff, and then on top of this injunction that they're being hit with, we could be less than 2 weeks away from having all of the key regulations governing player compensation and player movement in college sports being declared illegal in the courts. Like this, we are in just such a weird spot in all of college athletics right now, and I just don't know. The NCAA has just failed mightily, and I just don't have any faith in what they can do right at this point. So the sooner we stop making believe and pretending that there are really 130 teams that belong at that top level of college football, the better off we're going to be. I mean, there really isn't any excuse for even like a Georgia Southern, my alma mater, to be playing up at the highest level and with these bigger programs. Yes, they're both Division I football subdivision teams, but that doesn't mean they have the same budget. That doesn't mean they have the same following nationally. That doesn't mean that they have the same types of stadium and everything else. And when the biggest teams break off, I don't think it's necessarily going to be my favorite thing. It's this new era of college football. but it just seems to be the direction that we're heading.
Yeah, I really hope you're wrong.
I hope I'm wrong too.
Yeah, I know you do. And look, it's again for me, it's one thing if we break away from the NCAA with a bunch of teams, more teams than are in the Big Ten and SEC. It's a totally different discussion if it's just the Big Ten and SEC breaking away. If we wanted to do a breakaway in terms of Power Five versus Group of Five, I think we can get away with that. But what you can't have is just 35 teams or 40 teams. I think you're going to need the 60 teams and upwards of that to kind of be involved here. I don't want to get into a situation where it's just the Big Ten and SEC as we know it today, and they're doing their own little thing, and everyone else is playing for whatever championship they have. So if you are going to break away, you are going to have to. Now we do get into that whole idea of the super conferences and this and that, and you're going to have to really upscale things because it can't just be the Big Ten and SEC.
See, I disagree with that though, because the networks in the market itself have already dictated that they'd be willing to pay for that product.
But I'm not talking about the money aspect here. That's again, that goes back to where I think you get into a dangerous
we have to,
play.
but the money is the biggest thing that
no,
exists.
I see, but this is where I think you're getting lost in the plot too, and this is what my concern is this joint advisory group can't be thinking along those lines. I agree with you. The money dictates and the market dictates and the networks dictate and all that stuff. I think they need to fight against that for the betterment of the sport, because I do think if that's where this heads, and that is my concern from the get-go here, I think it is not for the betterment of the sport to have 30 teams, 35 teams playing for one title and 100 whatever playing for a totally separate title, with the ACC and the Big 12 and the Mountain West and whatever.
Sure.
If you're going to do this, if you're going to follow this breakaway or whatever, you've got to add a bunch more teams. It can't be about 35 teams, two conferences doing their own little thing over here and the rest of the college football world over there. That's my concern. And you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, but the point is they have the leverage to do it.
That's they certainly can. I totally agree. They
leverage
could,
is everything. So all they have to do is threaten it, because they could do it. The market is what I was saying is like the money.
I actually think they lose value doing that.
They can do it. Ultimately, it's not in the best interest of college football and college athletics.
I don't think it's in their best interest. It's not in their best interest.
Probably not. But it's like I said, it's leverage. It pushes them to accept whatever.
I would call them. You know what? Honestly, Garrett, I don't think it is. I would call their bluff if I'm the other schools. I think you're losing it. If it's just the SEC and the Big Ten, sorry, you lose a 12-team playoff, which makes way too much money. You're not going to put 12 teams out of 34 into a playoff. I actually think it would work poorly, if we're being honest. I do think you would. The games are the games, but I actually don't think it would work out as well as some other people. I just think if you're just 35 teams playing on your own little thing, it's going to lose value. It's going to lose value. You're not going to feel the same.
Well, the other thing about the 12-team playoff, the 12-team playoff is only in consideration for this year and this year alone. It is not.
They're not going
locked in.
Garrett, come on. They're not going backwards.
I'm just telling you. I'm not saying they will.
But they're not going backwards.
I'm just saying there's no contract in place.
Okay, who cares? They're not going backwards.
They can go right back to 4 teams.
Do you think that's what's going to happen?
No, I don't think that's
okay. They're not going backwards.
I think these other teams are going to join on. So I think it's almost a moot point. Like I was talking about, though, it's the leverage of the situation. Because
I'm not sure they have leverage. I don't think they are maximizing profit by pulling away. I really don't.
It wouldn't be maximizing profit, but but it's all about control. Control is a big deal for this.
I don't know, man. Like the more I think about it, the more they need these other teams.
Why?
Because I think when you're just 35 teams doing your own little league, it's not the same. It's not going to be college football. No. I just don't think you're maximizing profit there. I think the thought process would be we can set our own thing, but like you're also not competing with anyone else, and the market may actually go down at that point. I'm not sure.
I think we have to think of these as professional teams at this juncture. These are effectively professional teams, and it works at the professional level. I mean, we have 32 NFL teams, we have 30 MLB teams, you have 32 NHL teams, right? I mean, it works for them. It seems like a pretty strong number. And you check just about every region off of the list, right? You hit the Southwest, I guess if you include Texas, but you hit Southern California and the Pacific Northwest. You hit the Midwest, you hit the Southeast, you hit the Northeast, and you hit the East Coast. You hit everything. You hit just about every corner of the country.
I don't think it's about the region, though. I think it's
No,
about isolating 30-something teams and
it's
how
not
big of a
college
change.
football. Like it would cease to be college football. But I mean,
I think when we talk about maximizing finances, that they actually need the smaller teams, whether they are aware of that or not, is a separate story.
Mhm.
I think this would be, I think it would be a big mistake if just two conferences pulled away. I think it would be a big mistake.
I hope it ends up not. It doesn't end up getting to that level.
It won't. It won't. It's never going to be two conferences. Like I agree with you. The thing is, if they do pull away from the NCAA, it will be involving the other institutions to some extent. Not all of them. You're not taking all the group of fives, but you're not pulling away and leaving Florida State and leaving Clemson and leaving a number of the Big 12, Arizona. Like you're just not. You're good. You're gonna add. Like I said, you can't do it with 35 teams. You talk about 60 though, or 64. Now we start to have a discussion. But it just won't work with 34, 35 teams.
I think in a perfect world, we do see something like that happen.
Yeah.
And of course, we would see the end of likely the SEC and the Big 10 and the Big 12, at least the names, the monikers.
Yeah, by name, sure.
Yeah, by name, they're going to probably go away. But the new era of college football is certainly set to be a very confusing one. But hopefully we get some clarity here soon. I mean, of course, the courts are going to be deciding their stuff. So we'll see what happens with all of this random news and changing and shifting that happens in college football. But the end of the NCAA is probably not on the horizon, but the writing is on the wall. So we'll see. We'll see what ends up happening. I think I was being probably a little bit dramatic. They're still going to have a role of some kind.
Well, and look, it's not just you, by the way. There are plenty of other people who are suggesting. I just think there's a big conclusion, Matt, that they're all on top of, and I just don't think that's just not the first order of business. Is not to pull away and become your own thing and kill the NCAA. There's actual things that can be fixed within the sport to the benefit of all of the schools that I think they're going to focus on. So it'll start there, and maybe down the road we'll threaten that some more.
I hope so, and hopefully we get some answers from these guys. And,
yeah,
I mean they're the two biggest players in the sport, so we'll see if those two can get together, put their brains together, and come up with some solutions where the NCAA has created problems. But let's move into some of our other discussion for today. Senior Bowl down in Mobile, Alabama. The National beats American 16-7. Spencer Rattler was named the MVP. He had a pretty good day on Saturday. He actually had a pretty good week, really. Tyke Smith was named the defensive MVP, the safety from Georgia. He also had a pretty good game. He had an interception and played pretty well. What are your thoughts on the Senior Bowl in general? I know I stand kind of meh with it. I mean, of course, as a Falcons fan, I mean, I understand. I remember Rashid Hageman and all of the hype that came out of him from when he was coming in from Minnesota. The Atlanta Falcons, of course, that year were the coaching staff down there at the Senior Bowl. But I don't know who was the coaching staff this year.
The Jets,
the Bears,
I think, and I'm not
the Bears
sure.
Was last year. I think it was
I'm not sure who else. I think it was the Jets, but I could be wrong.
But the point is, what are your thoughts on this? Any takeaways?
I mean, for me, it's not about the game. Like, the performances are cool, whatever, but like, it's about the practice. It's about seeing good on good, receiver versus cornerback, O-line versus D-line. It's about the lead up to the game, the practices. And that's why I was so disappointed we didn't see Michael Penix throw a little bit more and do a couple things. But honestly, the combine is where the quarterbacks, I think, get after it. This to me is less a quarterback event, which is what makes it interesting because quarterbacks drive the sport. That's where all the discussion is, certainly at the top of the draft.
Mhm.
But to me, it's interesting because this is not a quarterback driven event. It's great to have the quarterbacks that you have. And
Yep.
there are quarterbacks from the middle or back of the pack that I think benefit more than the top guys do, like your Spencer Rattlers, your Michael Pratts, even Bo Nix, who was out there spinning it a little bit. But to me, it's interesting to see the other guys that can play their way into the first round, from the receivers, the cornerbacks, the O line, the D line, and so I really enjoy the lead up and the practices much more than the games themselves.
Yeah, I don't take the. I didn't watch the game. I don't know
Mhm.
if you could tell from that. Because you don't pick a lot. Like you said, like you don't pick up a
Yeah,
lot from the game itself. I mean, of course, people change when you have live bullets coming, but I mean, just as far as individual standouts, I mean, Lad McConkey took a lot of
yeah,
uh, praise out from this week. I mean, he's going to be a steal for somebody. I know. I mean, he's been just at his time at Georgia. He's people are going to call him a sneaky athlete or whatever. No, the dude's a baller. Dude can find space. He runs routes very effectively. He's kind of like a Calvin Ridley almost. The way he's able to just he's just so smooth man. And I think he's going to make a team very very happy. Peyton Wilson's another one from NC State, the linebacker. He had a big week. A lot of people see him as a day 2 pick, maybe in the second round, maybe the third, but I don't know, man. He was very, very effective when he was at NC State. He won a lot of awards. I think he was an All-American last year. So I think there are a number of people, but of course, like you said, the quarterbacks are going to steal all the attention because it's a quarterback-driven league. But I like the way you put it. How it's a quarterback-driven league, but not a quarterback-driven event. It
mhm.
gives out a lot of people's a chance to shine. But I did hear the quarterbacks didn't impress all that much. Sam Hartman played very poorly on Saturday. He was like 6 of 25 or
He
something.
played very poorly on a couple Saturdays this season,
Dude,
and that's why
yeah,
they.
he sure did.
That's what. But yeah, I mean, you get guys like Toledo's Quenyon Mitchell,
Yeah.
the cornerback who maybe had the best week of all leading through the practices.
Mhm.
It's just about those other stories, the other guys. So I can certainly appreciate that. And
Mhm.
look, there are guys I've never heard of. Like I know we cover the sport, but there are guys I've never heard of that are going to be first rounders. And so for
Yeah.
this to be one of the first opportunities to get a look at them, you see a couple names that you've read on mock drafts. It's interesting to see what they do, especially good on good when it's receiver, cornerback, or O line, D line drills.
Yeah, another one that apparently stood out was Luke McCaffrey, the little brother of Christian McCaffrey. He had 2 nice catches in the game, including a one-handed grab. So if he's anything like his older brother, then he's going to make some team
Let
very
me, let me
happy.
help you out. He's not anything like his older
I don't
brother.
think he
Okay,
is. I mean,
let me
he
just
was at
make
a
that clear.
I want to say he was at Michigan, and then he transferred over to where he is now, or where he just graduated, I guess, from Rice.
Speaking of Michigan,
For
Roman
JT
Wilson
Daniels.
had a pretty good week too.
Mhm.
He
Roman
had
Wilson's
a couple
good
circus
player, man.
catches, good stuff. So he may have played himself. He may be a first rounder as well. Who knows?
We'll see if he actually plays up into that first round, but he could play right up into that back end of that first round. He's a great player, man. I still remember when he was playing in that national title game. Well, not the national title game, not the one I'm referencing, but that final drive against Alabama in the Rose Bowl. Instead, not the national title game, the Rose Bowl, and he was critical on that drive with JJ McCarthy on that march down the field. If it wasn't for 2 of his plays, they don't score that touchdown. They don't force overtime. Dude has played big time football games, and I think that the players who have played in those types of games, everyone benefits. Everyone benefits. But did you have any other big thoughts or any takeaways from this before we move on?
No, the other thing about the Senior Bowl I always found interesting is we always hear about people who boost their draft stock. It
Yeah.
feels like we never hear about anyone who lowered their stock, and I just don't know how that works, but that seems to be the case.
Yeah, and we'll see. We'll see. Someone's probably going to get drafted because of a great performance, but
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think it's a great, just more exposure, and it's good thing for these athletes. Nagy's done a great job down there with that program. So let's move into some of our last bit of news for today. NFL teams are sweeping into the college ranks. No surprise, of course, with all of the uncertainty and craziness of the sport that is right now. Why not move up to the sport's highest level? The 2 biggest ones, of course, are Chip Kelly and Ryan Grubb. Chip Kelly, of course, the head coach of the UCLA Bruins as they move into the Big Ten next year. And Ryan Grubb, the brand new offensive coordinator for the Alabama Crimson Tide after he followed Kalen DeBoer over from Washington. So he is getting interest with the Seattle Seahawks as their offensive coordinator spot is open. Chip Kelly just interviewed with the Las Vegas Raiders, almost called them Oakland, and he apparently also has some interest with the Commanders gig. So makes sense to me, but Alabama's in a really weird spot. So that's the one I really want to focus on first. They're not used to having all of this uncertainty with their coaching staff. And if Nick Saban retires suddenly, that's always going to throw you for a bit of a loop. Kalen DeBoer comes in, and now he's about to lose his offensive coordinator. And it's an interesting time over there in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah, we'll see if it ultimately happens or not. Look, Saban had to go through this quite a bit with his OCs. They were always taking head coaching jobs, but this is a slightly different story because one, they didn't have a season in which Grubb showed what he can do. He's just going to potentially leave. But two, you're doing it for a similar gig at the NFL level. You're not doing it to become a head coach. And certainly that is something that is out of the ordinary to recent years, but seems to be something that is becoming a lot more customary now. We even to the point where you got a head coach in the ACC leaving to become a coordinator in the NFL. So a step down to go up to the pro level. We're talking about Jeff Hafley there, Boston College. Yeah. And so it is a very interesting time. But for DeBoer, specifically to this story, if Grubb does get pulled away, very interesting because that is not the way you want to start your head coaching regime, trying to replace assistants already. It is already going to be difficult to whatever you want to try and keep Alabama on the level that they've been at. But replacing an OC when the hiring cycle is mostly already done, you're going to have to convince someone to leave at this point for your opening. It'll be very interesting to see if it does play itself out. But the other aspect of this, Garrett, and it goes back to Hafley, but also the Chip Kellys of the world who, I mean, look, he was almost fired this year reportedly anyways. So don't blame him if he's, on the way out. But you've got a situation where coaches are not necessarily as into the college game as they once were. And the changes in the time, the era that we are in college football with the transfer portal and with NIL and recruiting and everything that goes into not just being a football coach. I'm not sure I can blame guys for trying to find a spot in the NFL and just putting all the college BS aside because it is just too much to be doing the exact same thing you could be doing at the NFL level in college with all that other stuff. Some guys are built for it. Some guys love it, but it's not for everyone. So I don't think this is the last time we'll see decisions that are made like this, whether it's becoming a coordinator or going even from a head coach to a coordinator, stuff like that.
Yeah, and the biggest one who could move from head coach, of course, you mentioned Hafley, but Chip Kelly is.
Yeah,
it's been a brutal offseason for the Bruins. Of course, they're moving into the Big Ten next year. They're down 39 spots from where they were last year in the recruiting rankings. They're 68th. 68th. That's terrible. And of course, you just lost Dante Moore. You just lost your defensive coordinator to USC. You just lost two of your top defensive players in Kamari Ramsey and John Humphrey to go play for USC as well. Dude, they're lagging in the name, image, and likeness space. And it's only going to get tougher. You're moving out of the Pac-12 and into the lion's den that is the Big Ten. So Kelly flirting with the NFL right now is about as bad as it could get for UCLA. And it's not really a demotion, I don't think. I mean, do you see it as a demotion, even if you're going head coach to just offensive coordinator? Do you see it as demotion? I guess it would be.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a demotion, but I do think it's a step down. Now, in Kelly specifically, I understand it. Like, we talked about it. We talked about it in the seat. Like, if your school's holding conversations to fire you and then they retain you for a year, like obviously there's not much of a future there anyways, so I don't blame him for looking to get out. But yeah, I think going from a head coach to a coordinator, is a step down. But,
Sure.
this is a 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I mean, it's a step down for the moment. But if it ultimately leads to an NFL head coaching gig, which I assume is the goal for some of these guys, um, then yeah, I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's UCLA probably made a mistake by not firing Chip Kelly.
Yeah, you can't have those
Once
reports come
reports
out.
Yeah, once reports come out like that and the world knows that he's kind of a dead man walking,
Yeah,
and then you kind of let him keep going, it's a disservice to your institution, it's a
yeah,
disservice to your players, and you can see why the recruiting suffered mightily. But of course, you're moving into the Big Ten, and they just wanted somebody to scapegoat for next year. That's
yeah,
probably what it was. But what it ends up doing is it's a disaster. And now you could lose your head coach in February after all of the entire cycle has already happened. So you're going to be getting somebody's crumbs, just whatever's left. And that's what UCLA is going to be getting. And that's the guy who's going to be taking you into the Big Ten next year instead of the guy that you should have fired in November. And look, it's not because Chip Kelly's a bad coach. I mean, look, they were 8-5 this past year. They were a good program. Like, they were fine. Like, they weren't super great. I mean, they kind of disappointed down the stretch, but they had a strong defense and I don't know. They just sort of fell apart.
You
Once
want
the season went
a
on.
real spin wheel cycle here? What if Chip Kelly leaves and they actually give the head coaching job to Grubb, who was considered for the Washington job? I mean,
Brother,
well, yeah, I mean, you're trying to
I
find
guess
hires. I mean,
you're scraping the bottom of the barrel. No offense to Grubb. I mean, he knows the West Coast, I guess. Um,
I think he was seriously considered at Washington. So it.
I don't know if he was.
You don't think so?
I don't think so. They moved past him pretty quickly. He interviewed, I think, but then they moved on pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, he's on the younger side, right? He's like what, 35 or something. He's not super old.
He seems to be college football's Ben Johnson, if you will, in terms of just like a hot up and coming guy. So who knows?
Sure.
But
You
yeah,
never
I
know.
mean, you're right. Like if this happens, like it's one thing for Kalen DeBoer to have to replace a coordinator. I think you could find that. It's a totally different thing for UCLA to have to find a head coach at this
Yep.
point. After we just went through a dual cycle, if you will, with Alabama, Washington, and to a lesser extent Michigan, because they kind of figured their own thing out. But and we just saw how the cycle gets difficult and how jobs may or not be there. I mean, Jed Fish and like the guy from what San Diego or whatever it was, San Jose
State, yeah.
State,
Go to
Brennan.
Arizona.
Like, I mean, it's just like, yeah, that's not the position you want to be in at this time of year, especially right now, as you're like, I mean, when is signing day? Is that this week?
Yeah. This week.
I
It's the
mean,
8th.
imagine he gets hired like over the next 36, 48 hours, and you're like right up at signing day. You're like, well, okay, never mind then.
It's a
So yeah,
strange world
it's
we're in.
odd. Yeah.
Yeah, because it also opens that 30-day transfer window.
Oh, it's a
And
mess.
you'll
It,
see
it will be a total mess.
it's a
They
complete mess.
Yeah, they got to figure something out. I mean, you go back to what we talked about at the start, but
Mm.
coaches leaving and people just, but that's a tough thing to deal with too. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, college football's in a weird spot, and we're going to continue talking about it right here on the College Football Overtime Podcast throughout the course of this offseason. So make sure you're liking and subscribing and jumping in and joining the conversation. If you got a comment, drop it below. But Abe Gordon, that was a lot of fun. We're going to have to do this again.
Look, it's just one of these things where this one, especially this SEC Big Ten thing, is going to be something that you and I revert back to quite a bit over the next couple of years. If college football survives for the next couple of years as we know it. But
we'll see.
Yeah,
We'll see if
this
it
is
survives
one
the next 2 weeks, man.
Yeah, but this is something that unlike some of the other stories we ultimately discuss, this one I do think has some momentum to enact actual change and make a difference in the sport. So it'll be interesting to see what their focus is and how things play out for them.
And it has legs, and it'll start running here very soon. And we'll keep you apprised on all of that right here on the College Football Overtime Podcast. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you again very soon. For Abe Gordon, my name is Garrett Chapman. We're signing off. We'll see you next time.